Hey, check this out. Ooh, a Trek 500. Classic. Do you know how old this bike is? Oh, it is from the 80s. Ooh, classic Suntour down tube shifters, over cables, foam grips. Not so comfy saddle, but hey, whatever works for them. But classic steel, no less. Yeah. Any case, let's check it out after this. All right, hey, welcome, John. I brought in an expert to talk about this Trek 500 that I just featured in my stand. And yes, there are some very interesting logos, and kind of made me kind of go, oh, we need to know a little bit more about these logos and head badges and fonts and all that to the frame. Well, that's a little bit of history piece, but in addition to, I remember with conversations with John before about Suntour and how they were a pretty good rival with Shimano in that particular time period. And yeah, there's some good features and a couple of little surprises. So I kind of want to break it down, in which we break down bikes anyway. You got the frame and fork where Trek made, and then the componentry with the shifting and the brakes and that kind of thing of the period piece. In addition to, lastly, we'll talk about the wheels, which is also a cliffhanger here for you, a gold nugget at the end, which I thought it was very entertaining. But let's start with the actual bike itself. This is the classic Trek 500. Overall thoughts, and what part of what role were you at with Trek at the time?
I was in a retail role in the early 80s, and that's this bike. It was, I believe it's a 1984. So I was at the good old Denver spoke at Evans and Williams in Denver, right close to Denver University, DU. And we were one of the largest Trek dealers in the country, or getting to that point. I think a couple times we got into top 10. And this was bikes like this were, kind of a mainstay for us back then. It's an affordable, high-performance bicycle at the time.
Yeah, nice. And the Trek 500, in the particular, give us a snapshot of, if you remember, how many road bikes was Trek making, as in models, and where does this fit within that model line?
Well, there must have been. That's a good question. I'm trying to remember. I don't know if I ever thought about how many. I would imagine there were probably around between 10 and 15 road bike models. They were separated into three different groups. One, kind of the flashy one was the racing bikes, so shorter wheelbase, steeper angles, faster handling. And then they were kind of a classic road bike, which the 500 is, and then a touring geometry. So it was sort of like short, medium, and long wheelbase is one way to think about it. So this bike, it's interesting. I was just kind of reviewing it. I found an 84 brochure online, and they talked about it like, this is a bike for any type of road. And it was kind of funny because I thought it was similar to how people are describing buying a gravel bike now. It's like, I want to kind of get off the beaten path a little bit. I want a bike I can do anything with. Not that this is a gravel bike, although with some modifications you could probably make it more dirt road gravel bike worthy, but it kind of leans that way. Another interesting thing about it for these bikes is that they were trying to appeal to the running crowd. Back in the early 80s, there had been late 70s into early 80s, there was a real boom in running, which is actually kind of happening now. I'm seeing way more people running now than I had in years. But back then, people are getting running, people are starting to do triathlons. And actually in the Trek catalog on these models, they say, this is a great part, this could help build your running fitness as well as, riding fitness. So kind of interesting. 500s were a bike you could sell to somebody because, you could race this bike at the time. You'd have to make some modifications, but you could have made a racing bike, or you could have made it, kind of a overnight touring bike, a commuter, very versatile bike, and pretty much a pleasure to ride as well.
Yeah, to that state, I mean, this bike was actually in really good shape, And as you can see the tire tread on the right side there, they put more of that Continental inverted tread, which is like your gravelish, about as gravelish you can get on a road bike with dealing with the calipers that are on it for the brakes. But it is definitely ridden or being ridden for that. And it is the original owner. She purchased this back in the early 80s, and it kind of has a gleam in her eye because either it was a personal purchase. A bike can be more than just a bike, right? It can be something that's, it brings you back memories. It might be an independence thing with kids for sure. That's where I really got from this individual that brought this bike in for doing a standard tune. And honestly, it either was well maintained over the years, in addition to taken care of, but the wearing on it is very minimal. Not that she rides a ton, I don't think, but still, a few times, every other week or what have you during the summer. It's held up over the test of time. It's just amazing.
I think that some of it goes to the build quality of the frame. It is high quality tubing used in it. It was high quality paint, high quality lugs. The joints, you could use a pointer maybe later to highlight what the lugs are. But it's all the junctions of the various tubes. Those are lugs, are the things around the tubes. But I believe they were investment cast dropouts. So it was a well-made frame. We used to brag. So it was Reynolds tubing. So that is I believe a manganese molybdenum tubing with butted tubes. So they would actually make the ends of the tube thicker, and that would allow you to lighten up the frame. So thicker to deal with the heat from the brazing. Then you could thin it up towards the middle. That's the basic thing for butted tubing. The stays on it and the forks were from a Japanese company called Tange, Tange, Tange tubing, and also I believe a chromoly tubing in the front and back ends of the bike. So
this is like back then they were making the whole frame chromoly or the Reynolds tubing. Correct.
Yeah, so 3 tubes Reynolds, and then the chain stays and the seat stays and the front forks were Tange tubing.
Okay, interesting. Because it's like one of those things. You see the sticker, right, and a lot of people assume that the whole frame is made by that one material, and
if you look at that carefully, if you get out your magnifying glass or whatever, in fact, in that picture right there below the word where it says chromoly. You see these butted frame tubes. So that means the main tubes of the frame. So that's a little bit of a tip off there.
Yeah.
The other thing I should have mentioned with the lugs, we used to talk about the fact that these were silver brazed versus brass brazed. So that's the material, the solder that you use to join the lugs and the tubes together. With brass brazing, you have to use a higher temperature. And with silver brazing, you use a lower temperature. So silver would allow you to make a good, an excellent frame joint. Obviously, this one has lasted for years and years, decades, at a lower temperature, which makes for a stronger joint versus having to use a higher temperature where you can potentially have a more brittle joint in a steel frame.
Well, that's good knowledge. I mean, it's one of those things that, nobody really talks about in steel manufacturing of today. I mean, they do probably on the more niche brands that are out there, but as in the quality being put in back in the 80s is just phenomenal. And looking at the paint, like you mentioned, the paint really polished up really well. I did my little detailing on it and put a ceramic coating. And unfortunately, the pictures do not give it justice.
Right.
Pulled into the sun. And I wish I got a picture of the lady's face, but when she saw the picture and her husband saw the bike in the sun, it just exploded in color and glitter. And they were like, whoa. And she was like, I haven't seen my bike like that in decades.
That's cool.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
It's I think there was a little bit of metal flake in the paint on it.
Yep. Definitely a glitter to it for sure.
Yeah, and then in this picture you can see the beautiful brass head badge there, and that was at the time when Trek started, they were going up against all these, grand old brands from Europe, Peugeot, Giton, Raleigh, in particular Raleigh. If you look at an old Raleigh, they have a brass, the Raleigh Heron, the heron like a bird. And so that was kind of a bit of a hallmark back then for steel bicycles, was to have a brass head badge like Trek was using. So they were saying, hey, we're legit, we're trying to make a real high quality bike here. So.
Yeah, I've seen like a lot of those head badges get popped on a lot of the old frames and sold separately, like on eBay and so forth. And it's kind of a cool little collection piece out there. And that, like you were saying, the head badge was kind of like the stamp or the patch or the shield or armor of the actual brand. And some brands put a lot of detail. I mean, insane amount of detail in their head badges. So with this particular, I noticed since from Parker Bikes, we've carried Trek, and they went through like 3 or 4 variations of head badge designs. And with this particular one here, with the whoosh going, do you have any insight of the design of that head badge or any story behind it?
As you say that, I know there's some story behind it, but I can't quite recall because it's been a long time. Yeah, I can't. I almost want to say maybe the lines going up either represent some sort of crop, or it might be roads. It might be roads going up. But
okay.
That I'm sure maybe if we did a Google search right now, it might pop up. One thing I wanted to say is we were talking about the tires, because you were saying the current tires on there, those were not the stock tires.
Yeah.
So we were using a smooth thread back then on the Treks or Trek. This is where they've made we're going to ride some dirt roads, but it was a smooth thread tire on that. So yeah.
And any insights on like this particular logo? I don't think I've ever seen this one before.
You probably have, and you just looked right through it because it's not very prominent. All I can remember, I think we used to refer to it as a postage stamp.
Oh.
Because it reminded me of an old stamp you'd put on a letter or something like that. Their Trek worked with a really nice marketing company in Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm sure they probably came up with it. But to me, it's probably trying to evoke hand-built craftsmanship, but with modern technology and engineering is kind of what that I find evocative there. So,
yeah.
And you can see Waterloo, the location. Yeah. Beautiful Waterloo, Wisconsin. That's somewhat midway between Madison and Milwaukee. The location was selected because Dick Burke lived in the Milwaukee area. Bevel Hogg, actually, I think he was, at the time they started Trek, was still I think he was an English professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So they were looking for a kind of an equidistant location for Trek. And my understanding is that's how they ended up with Waterloo, Wisconsin. So it's a little bit, I want to say east of I-90, about midway between Madison and Milwaukee.
Nice. And is that where like the Red Barn, the
classic? That's where the barn was. And then that's where the factory was built. And I'm not sure you'd call it a factory now or not. I think they're maybe still building some bikes there. I'm not sure, but it's quite. I mean, it's to me. I mean, when I was working for Challenge Tires, and we went to the GP of cyclocross in Waterloo, and it just blew me away. What it from what the factory looked like when I was working there, it's just amazing. There's great cyclocross course there. There's fantastic mountain bike trails, private, by the way. You can't access them without invitation from Trek, but great mountain bike trails about a mile or two from their front door. So.
Oh wow, nice. Yeah. Another decal I saw, and this was on the seat stay on the back. Like nobody would see this, and I was like, wow, like kind of attention to detail. As you can see, it's close to that postage stamp. Wow.
Yeah. And then you can see the metal flake there.
Yeah, the metal flake is a little more prominent for sure.
Yep.
Cool. So that's a really nice history bit on the frame itself. And I want to kind of dive into the Suntour portion of this. So let me
Mhm.
cue. So what was interesting to me is in the 90s, I remember they were doing a big shift, and this could have been any time. My memory's getting foggy, but they do a part swap, and usually is within the same model or same brand. Like Shimano would have Ultegra rear derailleur, but the rest of it would be 105. In this particular period piece, I noticed that the front and the rear derailleur were Suntour, but the crankset was a little bit of a different brand.
Mhm.
Um, and was that still is that kind of like in the same factory ish or partnership?
So Suntour, at this point in time, they weren't marketing cranks. So Sakae was another company that they were closely allied with, and and in fact, Sakai, I think, started to make, as Suntour got into like the Cyclone group and the Superb group, which is really well named because that's one of my, in fact, that was my, that was the best, in my humble opinion, that was the Suntour Superb Pro was the best group of the 80s. Just wonderful stuff, lighter weight, less expensive than Campagnolo. And the derailleurs worked quite a bit better than Campagnolo, actually. Um, but Sakai was kind of part of the Suntour family. You'd get your cranks from there. The brakes that Suntour used were built by Dia-Compe. So this basically is kind of a Gruppo without being a Gruppo.
Good. I mean,
Yeah.
they were known to be pretty. I mean, I've seen a lot of them, worked on a lot of them, and this one actually. I mean, when I popped the dust cover off of there, which they had the matching dust cover still, which was amazing. Just to double check the crank bolts, and they were still tight. I mean, it was
Yeah.
not loosening up, waddling out with a square taper underneath there. So that worked really well.
Yeah.
And obviously, these pictures are actually pre cleaning, but
Yep.
then you have the Suntour front derailleur there. Um, and it says AR. Was there like different? I mean, obviously there's different levels. Where does this fit in that line of levels?
This is a step or two kind of up in the Suntour line, the AR, if I recall it. You can see it's actually, in fact, I don't think there's any aluminum on that at all. I think it's completely steel. So, if you looked at like another derailleur further up the line, it would have more aluminum alloy on it.
Oh, okay, gotcha. And then we
Yes,
have the Suntour RT 1000.
yes, yes. So there you can see. So there are a couple things about this. So Suntour actually developed a patent for this type of design of derailleur. If you remember, the campy derailleurs of this time were still that kind of straight up and down, where the it's funny, I'm pointing at the photo right now. It's kind of funny. But this design actually allowed the derailleur cage and the chain to more closely follow the actual angle of the freewheel at the time, or cassette, depending on what you had on the back there.
Yeah.
They were smoother shifting, and both Shimano was designing around that until that patent expired. This is going to be a good topic here.
Yeah, I just wanted to show that as you're like, as the derailleur, but let's finish up with the derailleur.
Yeah. So this is if you bought this bike, and you were looking at another brand of bike, to pull up actually I keep seeing Univegas around here in Minneapolis, but say you looked at a Univega and it had Shimano, similar price point. This is every bit as good, if not better, than comparable price Shimano at the time.
Nice.
Based on that. Now, although this might have been when at that point Shimano might have been able to utilize the information in the Suntour servo pantograph mechanism patent. So.
Yeah, because it has a funky. Well, you look at that big old Phillips screw bolt there, and has an interesting spring compression there. for the
Yeah,
truck?
I would say this is lower end Suntour, both front and rear.
Yeah.
Um, like you're seeing some more steel bits on there. Like the top part is cast aluminum, but I think the rest of the derailleur is steel.
Yeah, let's before we go into the wheels, let's jump into the brakes.
Yep. Yep.
I've cleaned up a couple of these just classic Dia-Compes and just
Mm-hmm.
polished them up. And I mean, I sold them for like $15-20, but there's one of those things that are laying around the shop and like, okay, make these just go away. I mean, somebody will think they're cool, that kind of thing. But yeah, these particular ones where the cables were not internal. This is like pre-internal cabling for brakes, and then shifting eventually came to a part of the brake lever, and then they finally tucked the cables underneath for braking, and now it's all electronic. So, as the great grandfather of the brake lever of today, what's your insights on this?
Well, I mean, certainly everything works well on this. I mean, the Dia-Compe was a good quality manufacturer. They started, I think they emulated a lot of the old Weinmann brand, which Weinmann is kind of interesting because they were Swiss, and I think there was some Belgian production as well. But Dia-Compe started making really good quality levers. So this is actually a pretty good lever, and the caliper itself, the brake itself, is good. That is a forged aluminum caliper, not a cast caliper on this one. So it's a good set of brakes. I mean, for the time, if you look, the brake lever hoods, the gummy looking part of what we're looking at there, pretty comfy. It was there were some that were not as comfortable as this. So it was a good set of brakes.
Yeah, I mean, when I did a little fitting and the whoever set it up back in the day got her leg extension just about right, and the saddle position too.
Yep.
Was a little more of a reach for her when she was on the hoods, but she was used to that, and it was more of a racer position versus our endurance, more comfortable position nowadays. But she was fine with it. It's like one of those things like, well, do you have any pain when you're riding this? It's like, no. And it just fit like a glove, which reminds me of the 2500 that I refurbished and rode for a little while, which was the 7-tube carbon one a couple years later than this. But it had the same 1-inch quill stem. It had like a lower fitting position for the hands. And it kind of blew me away how well it kind of just fit. It was just like, even with the newer stuff and my newer bikes, it was like, oh, this wasn't painful to ride.
But that being said, I think what is available to us now, like if I found like a 24-inch 500 and I was going to, ride it a lot today, I would definitely probably change bars and stem. Basically because even though this was supposed to be this all-rounder, it's almost kind of a racing bike setup for that period of time. And yours truly, as much as I try and keep in shape, I just can't bend over as much as I used to on. I mean, God, everybody used to just slam the stems down and the seats went high, and it was just different back then. And in some respects, we didn't know any better. There weren't other products. Actually, we could probably do, if we could find enough. The whole evolution of handlebars from the 80s to now is pretty amazing. All the different things that have gone through there. But that would be one thing. If I was looking at this bike, I would definitely probably change the bars and stem. Well, that's kind of cool. That's a nice little. In fact, I'm trying to think. Those might be European bars.
Yeah, that was an interesting stamp that I found on the bar itself. So
I think those are Italian-made bars.
Nice.
It's either Italian or French, one or the other. So.
Yeah, it's definitely a period piece. I'm not sure if it was spec'd with that, but it was definitely done at that time, period, and been there ever since. So
I'm pretty sure also so those look like the foam grips on that. Those were not stock. That was an add-on.
Yeah.
That was the brand that was most popular, and we sell a lot of them, were grab-ons. So grab-ons. Used to sell them like hotcakes because a lot of the bikes came with bar tape, but it was it would look nice because you could always get all these beautiful colors of bar tape to complement the colors of the bike, but the grip was bad and there was absolutely no padding. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Yeah, and going to the brakes, we got the classic Dia-Compe 500.
Yeah, that's a good brake. That's the next level up, I believe, with the Grand Comps, which basically was the same aluminum bits, but with a higher level of finish and then better looking hardware on it. So,
yeah, those were pretty amazing. I mean, doing the tune on it, it was kind of impressive how they still stopped and grabbed and didn't make a lot of noise, like squeaking, that kind of thing. But in any case, yeah, those were, that's pretty much your Gruppo until you get into, this is going to blow you away. The Hilo-Matic.
Which I've always thought the better name for it would have been Problematic. But,
yeah, that goes with like the weird cassette style. And that's the one with I didn't have to pop this one off. And honestly, I don't think I have the tool.
Well, I do. I need to give you one. I think I've got more than one. But
yeah, I think this is the first time I've seen this since like 94. so
this is, I would put it, this is a really interesting part of the bike. And actually, I used to sell a lot of tracks based on this because I would have that tool. So it was kind of a dog bone shaped tool. So the one side of the dog bone would fit around that the ring, the kind of chrome looking ring you can see around the axle.
Yeah.
And you would loosen that up. And this was a cassette that you could pull right off. I don't know if do you have a picture of the hub with the cassette off?
No, I wasn't able to get it off. So.
Oh, that's right. So what this goes to is that instead of threading, instead of threading, the international threading symbol, it was a helical kind of design. So you take that lock ring off and you could pull that off. What that allowed you to do was you could make a really quick change, but it also allowed Maillard or Adam or Saks, there were a variety of companies ended up owning this design.
Okay.
You can move the bearings out further on the axle. So on the drive side, that meant that axle was stronger because it was supported further up.
Yeah.
So before, with a threaded on, you'd have a longer unsupported part of the axle between the dropout and the hub itself. So there were some kind of neat things about it. The other part of the tool, so there was the lock ring part. The other side of it was actually a bottle opener to take your bottle cap off your beer bottle. And on either end, there were two spoke wrenches, so two sizes of spoke wrench on either end of those.
Yeah.
That'd be a fun thing to have if you can track one of those down. I know where there is one.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah. So with that particular, with the cassette body, and if anybody's watching this is a little tech savvy, they know that the newer ones or the more standard ones for the last few decades are a straight slot system where just the cassette slides right on.
Yep.
This one had like a twist to it, so it kind of slid in there. So give me a little bit of historical piece, because prior to that it was like just the whole freewheel or the wheel would be threaded on there, which exposed the axle like a good inch or so, where we got a lot of bending. When you see inexpensive bikes today, you still see that practice. But was this a predecessor to the free hub body, or was that all within the same kind of historical placement of time?
The development was, it was interesting because this was French design. Shimano came out with the free hub thing. I think it was pretty close to that. And in fact, if you want to go down the Helicomatic rabbit hole online, you'll find people debating which one came first. I think actually the Helicomatic hit the market first, and what they were trying to get away from. So freewheel was where your cogs, the rear cogs, would thread onto that rear wheel, on the fine threads on that rear hub. And couple things about that is the more you rode and the stronger and harder you pedaled, the tighter you made that. And sometimes they were extremely hard to get off, or if they were corroded at all. I mean, and depending on, you actually had to have another special tool, a freewheel removing tool. You probably have some of those hanging around.
Yeah.
And so this tried to get away from that, the issues they had with threading, with where the freewheel would become too tight, and also stronger axles, where I think the main points in this patent, that's kind of what I recall. The interesting thing is they did make some improvements, but there also were some weaknesses, which was kind of funny because I was mentioning earlier, I used to carry a helicomatic wrench in my pocket, and I'd be showing somebody a Trek 500, and I'd say, well, check this out, and I'd pull the rear wheel off, and I'd pop that cassette off, and I'd explain the benefits, and then I'd put it back on, and off they go on a test drive. Ha ha ha! And it helped me sell quite a few bicycles. So at the Spoke, we used to trade bikes occasionally. If we didn't have a bike in our inventory, I had to sell something, and I would call my friends over at Touring Bicycles at 7th and Grant, and I'd talk to Alan Fine over there to see if he had a bike I could buy from him or swap with him. And I was over there doing a swap, and somehow helicomatic hubs came up, and I thought, man, those things are pretty cool. He says, oh no, we've had all sorts of problems. He says, check this out. And he showed me at least one hub where the spokes had pulled through the flange on the back. And I'd never seen that. So you can probably, where the spokes are entering there, they would actually pull it right through that aluminum.
Wow.
And that basically destroys your hub.
Yeah.
The other issue with the helicomatic hubs is their tooth profiles whether it was Atom freewheels or Atom cassettes like this thing had, were not as good as what Suntour was doing or Shimano at the time. It just was rougher shifting. And it was kind of funny because one of my colleagues at Trek who'd been responsible for speccing things like this got an internally famous quote at Trek by Bevel Hogg, who's one of the two founders of Trek. He says, never has one man done so much to bring a great company to its knees, or something like that. He was paraphrasing the Winston Churchill thing about the Battle of Britain and how the RAFs had never have so few done so much for so many. But we had a lot of problems with a lot of French parts, and this was right there at the top of the list. So after I talked to Alan Fine, I go back to the Denver Spoke, and we had 3 Treks come in with busted hub flanges that day.
Wow.
And then as I was getting ready for this podcast, I hopped online and I was on the Sheldon Brown site, and one of the contributors there was saying the distance between the flanges was actually about 2 millimeters closer, and their experience was that led to a lot of broken spokes. So more problems so you had shifting issues, you had durability issues, and I mean, this is amazing. This one has survived intact all this time. You might talk to her about it a little bit and tell her what she's got, because you can't find parts. Or if you're going to find parts, you're going to have to go on eBay and buy from somebody who's got a boneyard. And they don't shift well. The other thing is, as you look at this bike, if I was updating it, I definitely would want to lower the gear range, because it's got a 42, 52 on the front there. You'd want to lower, a smaller ring on there, and also a larger cassette on the back, so you could, have just a more comfortable bike to ride around. But it's a great platform to do that with. I mean, this is definitely a frame worth upgrading or updating.
Oh yeah, and that's where you have all those standard bits. They can do, and I can use that. If she wants to go 8-speed, we can get that frame spanner tool that I got.
Careful!
Oh yeah, I don't know if I want to go that route. I mean, the condition was really well. It shifted great. During inspection and cleaning and truing of the wheels, there doesn't seem to be any of those particular issues. Plus, she is not a huge. I mean, not the rider is pretty lightweight, so there's going to be less torque and so forth. And it's more recreational, so it may last. You know, I can almost guarantee. Well, maybe not.
Just beware of that French grenade in the back wheel there. So.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll keep it mindful, and we'll get her a wheel if we need to. But
just let her know what to look for, kind of. Yeah.
Exactly. But what really kind of blew my mind was this guy. The rims were eyeletted, which means it's a smooth surface for the spoke nipple to go in there and for adjustment, so it doesn't bind up against alloy to alloy rim portion where it's drawn out. And the name blew me away because Matrix was, when I started at my parents' shop in '89, Trek had Matrix everywhere, like Matrix tubes, Matrix tires, and everything else. And rims were part of the Matrix flavor until they either went to, I don't know if they did Icon, but they went to Bontrager basically at the end of the day. And seeing this being such an early '80s model, we still using the Matrix. Where did Matrix come from?
So Matrix it's a Trek brand. These rims were they'd bring in the forms, which is kind of funny because it's like this huge kind of, you'd see these extrusions, these aluminum extrusions. So you'd cut them and they'd be joined. I think most of them, in fact, I'm pretty sure all the manufacturing was done in Marshall, Wisconsin, which is maybe a mile or two away from Waterloo. But that is a Wisconsin-made rim right there, and that went all the way into the upper end stuff, the stuff you remember. You remember the ISO-C rims?
Okay, yeah.
Kind of sort of an aerodynamic looking thing. That was a hot rim. I would sell Matrix rims because when I was a Trek rep, we not only called on Trek dealers, we also called on just regular bike dealers. And I would sell a lot of Matrix rims to people who are not Trek dealers because they were good rims. This particular one was basically modeled after, I think, a Super Champion rim from France, but that was a good rim, both the Super Champ and the Matrix rims. The other interesting thing I'm remembering now, looking at these spokes, is the spokes on this were a company called Ohio Rod, if I'm correct, and they led to a lot of problems because we'd have bikes that would leave the spoke and somebody go out and ride them for, I don't know, a couple of weeks and come back and the spokes would all loosen up, and it was really hard to get the spokes. I'm not sure what was going on with these spokes and nipples, but they were not they should have been better. And after a while, Trek did change to, I think, I'm trying to think who it would have been, maybe DT at the time. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, the spoke, the actual, if you look at the matte, it had like a matte finish to it. It's the more classic spokes after this, or even during the period of time, it was like a shiny polished chrome spoke, and this was kind of like more of a dull. And also the threading of the spoke and spoke nipple contact, that's where spoke prep became a huge thing with like Will Smith spokes, that kind of thing. And then Trek made their own version, Zach or something like that, and it was like the first batch of it was too strong. It turned into be like Loctite. So we had like a year there that the spoke nipples would not twist. You'd be popping spokes. And then the next year they kind of diluted whatever they did to the formula to make it actually like Will Smith spoke prep. But I remember, I don't know if Will Smith was the first one to come out with spoke prep, but it was one of those staples of making and hand building wheels back in the period, or back in time.
Yep. That's one of the things now that you don't see. I mean, very, very few bike shops have wheel builders. I grew up in bike shops building wheels, so that was something if I could go into a bike shop and try and get a job, I'd say, yeah, I can build wheels.
Yeah.
All the way I built wheels all the way until I became a Trek rep. I was a wheel builder. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of a lost art, and just a teaser. I have there's a company out in California, and they do custom built wheels. Not the high. I mean, they do high end, but they don't do like high end. You can get like a good price point custom built wheel for $300 to $400, which are pretty decent replacement wheels and so forth. But just a teaser. But yeah, they're no longer in the shops. I think. Yeah, like early 2000s, I think a lot of bike shops has dropped it because the manufacturing of the wheels that are coming out of like, Reynolds or DT or American Classic or even the Bond Trackers were such a higher, like a higher quality coming out of manufacturing that the custom wheel building kind of dropped off because there wasn't that much as a need. And I think a lot of it could have been marketing too, lighter weight, carbon rims, whatever the Kool-Aid they were pushing at the time was definitely valid to some level. But you still had to have some knowledge of wheel building or at least replacing slopes
Mm-hmm.
because they would fail sometimes, and then you'd have to get separate, spokes and switch out the tensions and all that. But in any case. So yeah, I thought that was very interesting seeing Matrix. I'm like, whoa, look at that. That put me back in the day because I remember I might even still have like a Matrix 2 box somewhere laying around.
Yeah. Well, interesting. You were talking about the wheels. The first kind of high performance production wheels that we used to carry at the old Denver Spoke, because we were a high end pro shop, was Roval. So ROVAL, and some of the people out there might be familiar with that because Specialized now owns that brand. But
Yeah.
back in the 80s, Roval was the first. It was like a really high tension wheel set, and they were somewhat transformative. I mean, they were extremely lightweight, and the high tension allowed, it was a real high performance wheel. It being kind of more of a better power transfer, from what you're putting into the pedals right through the drivetrain and into the wheel. It would give you a good return. So that was the first. That was the first thing. So like if you came in to buy a bike, we'd show you. We did carry some Trek frames. We also had DeRosa, Pinarello, Merckx. It was a lot of fun, but we would build up wheels. So we would say, we can build wheels here. I can build your wheels, or here's this Roval set. So that was one of the first ones. So it took a while for the transition from bike shops not being wheel builders to where they bought pre-built wheels, whether it was at the low end or the high end. So.
Well, that's a good history. I didn't know where they came up with that name. I just know, Specialized uses it today. So
Yeah.
nice. Well, any other insights on this classic Trek 500? Not 5,000, 500?
No, I think we've. It's a nice bike. It's just, it's worthy of keeping running. I'd definitely keep your eyes on that helicomatic rear hub though. But,
Yeah. That's probably the Achilles heel of it for sure. But I've seen a few of these, and it's good to know that you were saying, telling me before in other conversation that the model above it, was it the 550 or 560? Now it goes into
so within there, so there's the 500. So there was the 560 was the shorter wheelbase version. So if you saw a 00, so 400 or 600 or 700s, that was the medium wheelbase.
Oh, okay.
Anything with a 60 or 70 was the short wheelbase. Anything with the number 20, so 520, 420, 720, those were the longer wheelbase touring models.
Okay. Good to know because they transitioned those number series a little bit differently. Like I remember like in the 90s, like if it's, the mountain bikes where if it was a 6,000 or 7,000 or 8,000, it was kind of the same frame geometry per se, maybe a little bit different in the frames, but you're talking like not necessarily the first number, but the last two digits or what delineated the type of frame it was for
Yeah.
touring to recreational to race.
And basically, the higher, so Trek started, although they did mess around because there were some 100 series bikes, but those were actually high-end racing bikes. But basically, you went 300, 400, 500, 600, 700 would get you through the steel. That was when they were building steel bikes. That was the hierarchy.
Okay.
The aluminum we got into aluminum. The first one was the Trek 2000, which was we had a waiting list. In fact, people were putting deposits down. That was the first bonded aluminum Trek that came in, was the Trek 2000. But then later we started using that 20 thing because I think the 1520 was the triple versus the 1500. Same frame, but 1520. So
Nice.
if you remember that, but
yeah, wow. Shaking those dust off those old brain cells. Well, thank you so much for giving us a historical piece and insights from being in the industry in that particular time period. And
yeah, it was fun.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for watching us talk about old tech and frames and all that. And if it's nice in your neck of the woods, definitely go for a ride. And thanks again for hanging out and watching us on The Soul Bike.
Yeah, it's great. Go ride your bike, new or old. It's still fun.
Absolutely. And again, thank you from the garage. See you next time.
See you guys.